Snow blankets the Montana mountains. Two black SUVs climb the isolated road toward a lone cabin. The colonel inside believes he is arriving to end this on his terms. Weeks earlier, on a frozen firing range, same colonel had stood before 40 soldiers and Pentagon observers. "Expect what from an ammo girl," he said. She stepped forward anyway, 1,100 meters, 18-mile crosswind. She took the rifle, settled behind the scope, and fired. First round, 9 ring, second 10 ring, third dead center. The entire formation fell silent. That night she opened the letter from her father, one name, the colonel. He had ordered the 1994 mission in the Arizona desert that killed him, because someone on their own side had given the enemy the plan. She went looking. Under a loose floorboard in a gutted ranch, she found her father's wedding ring and 8 pages of evidence. Then headlights died, American voices, American rifles. 6 operators moved in with Ranger doctrine. Gunfire ripped through the night. Her teammate went down beside her. Now the SUVs stop. The colonel steps out in full dress uniform, 4 armed men behind him. He walks toward the porch where she waits, the ring and the letter pressed over her heart. He stops at the bottom step. "Where's your grandfather?" "Fort Kellerman, Montana. 4:51 in the morning, the kind of cold that doesn't knock. It comes through the cinder block walls, through the steel door, through the insulated jacket and the thermal layer and the skin, and then deeper than that, down to the place that's still half asleep and wondering, every single morning, why you didn't choose an easier life." Ray Donovan had stopped wondering. She'd stopped somewhere around 19, maybe earlier. When a man hands you a rifle at 8 years old and says, "Pay attention," you stop asking why. You start watching. That's the whole of it. That's the entire lesson, and it took her most of her childhood to understand it was the only lesson that had ever mattered. She moved through the ammo cage the way she always did. Slow. Sure, her breath making small ghosts in the frozen air that the overhead lights turned a sickly fluorescent white. 2 of the 4 tubes had been flickering for 11 months. Nobody had replaced them. Nobody was going to. She'd learned to read in the flicker the way you learn to sleep through a train that runs past your window, not by fixing it, but by deciding it no longer had any power over you. Adapt. Or don't. Those were the only 2 options Henry ever gave her. 556. She ran her hand along the green steel boxes without checking the labels. She knew them by weight, by the small dents, by the order she'd stacked them in herself. 308. Match grade in the back. She'd separated it out years ago because nobody else on this base could be trusted to know the difference. And the difference, at 1,000 meters, was everything. Barrett boxes in the corner, heavy as headstones. This was her cathedral. This cold, ugly, flickering room full of objects designed to end lives. Outside this room she was nothing. A small woman in a work jacket who managed the inventory and didn't speak unless spoken to. But inside it, she was exactly who she was. She just hadn't yet found a single soul on this base willing to find out. The photograph was taped to the wall beside the inventory clipboard. It wasn't regulation, technically not permitted. She'd never once considered take it down. A man in uniform. Not young, that weathered, permanent age men reach after enough years of standing outside in hard country. His medals were half hidden by the angle of the shot. His smile was the thing that caught you. Easy. Unguarded. Smile of a man who had so much of it he could afford to throw some away. On the back in handwriting she'd memorized before she could spell her own last name. For Ray. Pay attention. Grandpa Henry, Ironside, Donovan, Delta Force. 3 deployments she knew about. Probably more she'd never be told. A man who could call the wind speed by the way the bunchgrass leaned. Who could read a ridgeline the way other people read a paragraph. Who taught his granddaughter to shoot before she was old enough to understand what a rifle was for. He was 72 now, living alone in a cabin 40 miles north of Missoula. Not because the world had forced him there, because he'd chosen it. Because some men, after enough years inside the noise, need the silence so badly that it becomes the only thing left that feels like home. She understood that better than she understood almost anything. She finished the count, signed the clipboard, hung it back on its bent nail. 5:43, 17 minutes before the first boots would scrape the corridor outside. 17 minutes of the world being only hers. Here was the thing nobody at Fort Kellerman understood about Ray Donovan. They thought she was quiet because she had nothing to say. Henry would have laughed at that. You can learn more in 10 minutes of watching than 10 years of talking, he used to tell her, and so she watched. For 3 years she watched. And in 3 years she had learned every single person on that base. They feared, what they were proud of, who they became the moment things went wrong. And in 3 years, not one of them had learned a single thing about her. Which was fine, which was, she told herself, absolutely fine. Except it was the morning of November 14th, and by nightfall the woman standing in that cage would not be the ammo girl anymore. She just didn't know it yet. The Pentagon observers arrived at 800 hours, 3 of them, suits underneath their cold-weather shells. The kind of men who carried clipboards and laminated checklists and had never once in their soft careers crawled a single yard through Montana mud, shook Colonel Randall Voss's hand at the gate. He shook back with precisely enough warmth to be professional and precisely enough iron to remind them whose ground they were standing on. This was his base, his command, 6 years running, and in 6 years he had never had a single reason to learn the name of whoever managed his ammunition. Why? Voss looked exactly like what he was. Former Rangers, Desert Storm. 57 years old, with a posture that had been carved into a single fixed shape decades ago. Chest squared, chin level, a walk that announced to every room that this was a man who had never been uncertain about anything in his life and did not intend to start now. The exercise was meant to demonstrate readiness, marksmanship, unit cohesion. Everything the Pentagon wants to see on a Tuesday in the high country. It went smoothly. Until it didn't, because at 7:15 that morning, Corporal Denny Walsh, the unit's finest long-range shooter, a 24-year-old from rural Georgia who could thread a needle at 800 meters on a bad day, had stepped wrong on a patch of black ice behind the motor pool. His right hand had shot down to catch the fall. The wrist had taken the weight at the worst possible angle, not broken, but swollen, locked, useless for anything that required a steady hold. So now Colonel Voss stood before his assembled unit. 40 soldiers, 3 men from Washington with clipboards, and one problem he had not planned for. 1,100 meters, he said. Wind out of the northwest, 18 miles an hour. Who's got it? Silence. Not the respectful kind. The other kind. The kind that fills a space when 40 trained people all decide at exactly the same moment to study their own boots, because 1,100 meters in an 18-mile crosswind was not a casual shot. It was not something you volunteered for with Pentagon evaluators watching unless you were absolutely certain. And nobody who had to stand in that wind and put their name on the result was anywhere close to certain. Ray was at the back of the formation. She came out to these sometimes, stood at the edge and watched the thing she understood better than anyone present knew she could. Her hand was in her jacket pocket. Her fingers were still, and the math was already running, 18 out of the northwest. At that range, serious push, 11, maybe 12 mo of correction depending on the load. Temperature hovering at 26, range elevation 4,300 feet. The match 308 out of the Remington 700. Drop near 36 moe. The way the wind would die in the last 400 yards because of the tree line that broke it on the east side. She had it, all of it. In about 8 seconds, she did not raise her hand, because this wasn't the moment, or because she was afraid, or both, which is usually the truth of the moments that matter most. And then Voss looked straight at her, not because he'd seen her, because his eyes swept the back of the formation the way a bored man's eyes sweep a crowd, and she was the only figure there not wrapped in full tactical gear. She'd come from the cage in her work jacket. She stood out the way the wrong thing always stands out in a row of right ones. His mouth did something that was almost a smile. Well, he said, loud enough for all of it. 40 soldiers, 3 men from Washington, the cold open air. Expect what from an ammo girl? 2 people laughed. Few smiled and then looked away. The particular way people look away when they know a thing is wrong and would rather not be photographed next to it. And Ray felt it, that old familiar arrival. The thing that starts in the chest and climbs. Not anger, exactly. Recognition. Her body saying, very quietly, "This room. I know this room." She knew it very well. She'd been living inside it for 3 years. Here is what nobody tells you about a moment like that. You can let it pass. You can look at your own boots, too. You can file it in the drawer with all the other moments you've filed, walk back to the cage, and be the ammo girl for one more day. Or you can step forward. She stepped forward. "Hand me the gun," she said. Not loud. She didn't need loud. The wind carried it for her. Voss blinked once, but she saw it. "Excuse me?" The Remington. She was already walking. Through the small gap that opened in the formation, not deliberate, just the way a crowd parts around something it didn't expect. "I'll take the shot. Hand me the gun." He looked at her. Then at the 3 men with clipboards. Then back, and he smiled. A real one this time, which was worse. "All right," he said, because he thought this was going to be funny. Because he was already writing the story he'd tell later. The ammo girl who raised her hand. The ammo girl who thought she could. She stopped thinking about what he thought. She took the rifle from Corporal Jensen, who handed it over with a look she couldn't quite name. Somewhere between "please don't" and "I have to see this," she settled at the bench to check the glass. Night Force 5 to 25, good optic. She brought it to range, checked the load, 175 grain. She knew this cartridge the way she knew her own pulse. And here is the thing about the long shot that nobody understands until they've made one. It is not about power, not the rifle, not even skill in the way people picture skill. It is about stillness. It is about finding the quiet place inside yourself, while the entire outside world is wind and cold and 40 pairs of eyes and 3 evaluators and a commanding officer who just made you the punchline in front of all of them. You go to the quiet, and you do the thing there. She ranged it. 1094, 35.5. Set the windage. Thought about the tree line. Added a touch right. Breathed in, breathed slow, felt her heart. 1 beat, 2 between the beats. First round caught the 9 ring. She never heard the formation react. She was already loading the second. The wind dropped half a mile an hour. She made a correction so small it wasn't thought anymore. It was knowing. Second round. 10 ring, third round. Center. She set the rifle down. The same way exactly that she set everything down that mattered, carefully. Without ceremony, she stood. She turned around, and this is what she saw: 40 soldiers. 3 men from Washington. 1 colonel. Not one of them was speaking. Voss was looking downrange, then at her, then downrange again. His face was doing the one thing she had never once seen it do in 3 years of watching him walk past her like she was part of the wall. It was blank, just blank. From a man who always kept an expression loaded and ready, blank was the loudest sound she had ever heard. She handed the rifle back to Jensen. "Good weapon," she said. "Check the extractor spring before you run it again." It dragged a little on the third load, then she walked back toward the cage, alone. Heart slamming so hard she could feel it pulsing in her fingertips. But her hands were steady. Her hands were always steady. She didn't sleep, not because she was savoring it, not the way athletes replay the great moments. She replayed the 3 shots exactly once, briefly, and then she set them aside, because the shots were not the thing keeping her awake. The box was the thing, Henry's box. He'd mailed it 3 weeks earlier, before he went in for the procedure on his left knee. Just the knee he'd said on the phone, and the voice he used when he wanted you to stop being afraid for him. Stop worrying. But he'd sent the box anyway. She'd been avoiding it the whole time. The way you avoid the things that feel like they're about to rearrange your life. She opened it at 11:17. Cross-legged on the narrow bunk in the room she'd occupied for 3 years. Single overhead bulb turning everything a soft, tired yellow. The bass hushed around her in that deep middle-of-the-night quiet that made her feel like the last waking person on Earth. The box wasn't dramatic. That was the thing about it. Henry didn't do dramatic. He did dog tags. A second set, which meant a question she'd save for later. A photograph of her father she'd never seen. A letter Henry had addressed to her, which she set apart to read last. And a smaller envelope, tucked tight against the side. The paper had gone faintly amber, the way paper does when it's been kept somewhere dry for a very long time. Her name across the front, Ray, not written by Henry. She knew that handwriting. And her hands. The hands that had been steady all day, through 1,100 meters of wind, through 40 witnesses, through Randall Voss's face going blank. Her hands were not steady now. She sat with the envelope a long time before she opened it, because somehow, the way you sometimes know a thing before you allow yourself to know it, she understood that whatever was inside could not be unread, that it was the kind of thing that reaches back and changes the shape of everything that came before it. She breathed, slow and deliberate, the way Henry taught her to breathe before anything that mattered. She opened it, 1 page. Her father's writing, Thomas Donovan's writing, the same slant from the birthday cards she'd received until she was 7, same way he built the capital R in her name like he was planting a small flag, dated March 2004, 1 month before he died in Iraq. "Ray, if you're reading this, I didn't come home. There are things I need you to carry, because I can't. There's a name. You may run across it. You may not, but Randall Voss. Don't trust him, don't ever be alone with him, and don't believe him if he tells you he cared about me. He didn't. He knows why I'm going to die. Not why I died. Why I'm going to be killed. There's a difference, and I need you to hold on to that difference no matter who tells you otherwise. Grandpa Henry knows all of it. When you're ready, really ready, ask him. He'll know what that means. I love you. I'm sorry I won't be there to watch you become who you're going to be. Dad." She read it twice, set it on her knee, picked it up. "Read it once more. Killed not died killed. And the name in the center of it, Randall Voss, the man who had stood in front of 40 soldiers 13 hours earlier and called her an ammo girl. The man who had watched her walk away from the bench and never once understood what he was looking at. The man who had been her commanding officer for 3 years, who walked through her building, past her face, past the wall where her father's letter sat in a box 3 weeks running, with no idea at all, what she carried. What had come to rest inside his own command without him ever seeing it arrive. She sat very still. The base was quiet outside. Her father's words were in her hands. When you're ready, really ready, ask him. She thought about Henry. In a hospital room in Missoula, 3 weeks ago. Stop worrying. She thought about him packing this box with those careful, deliberate hands, timing it. He's been waiting. The thought landed soft and total. He's been waiting for this. He didn't know when it would come, but he packed the box so that when it did, she'd have what she needed. She pressed her palms flat against her knees and made herself slow down, because this was not a thing you reacted to. This was a thing you planned. Planning required. He's been 20 feet from you for 3 years. She pushed it down. You handed him the range report last Tuesday. You looked him right in the stop it. She breathed again. Slower this time, and in that slowness she made a decision. She would not react. She would not confront. She would not do one single thing that was fast or loud or visible, because that is not how Henry Donovan taught her to do anything that mattered. Observe first, every time, always. She would find out what her grandfather knew, and only then would she decide what would happen to Randall Voss. She folded the letter, slid it into the breast pocket of her jacket, over the left side, where she could feel the small stiff square of it every time she moved. Then she lay back in the dark and did not sleep. And for the first time in 3 years, the not sleeping didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like the night before something begins. He came at 6:45, not Henry. The other one. She was back in the cage, of course she was. It was 6:45. Where else in this world would she be when she heard footsteps in the corridor that didn't belong? Soldiers had a rhythm in their boots on concrete. These were lighter than that. Careful. The footsteps of a man who learned to move quietly somewhere that punished noise. She kept counting rounds. The door opened. He was around 50, gray coming in at the temples, decent suit that had spent recent hours folded in a carry-on. Not law enforcement posture, something a half step off from it. Something that said, I ask questions for a living, and I have gotten very good at knowing when the answer I'm being handed is not the one I need, Ms. Donovan. She didn't look up. Cage is closed to non-personnel, I'm aware. He stepped inside anyway, held up an ID. She read the part that mattered. Defense Intelligence Agency. She went back to counting. Felix Warden. He said, I know who you are. She didn't. She wasn't going to tell him that. He paused. A half beat of recalibration. She filed it away. You had quite a morning yesterday. I did inventory. Before that, she set down the box in her hands, turned and looked at him fully for the first time. What do you want, Mr. Warden? To talk about your grandfather, and here was the thing she had not braced for. Not the mention of Henry. She'd already understood Henry would be part of whatever was coming. What she hadn't braced for was the feeling it produced. The specific, almost physical feeling of being looked at by a man who actually saw what he was looking at. He knew what she was, not the ammo girl. Something else. She kept her face flat. I'm listening. He sat on the one stool without being asked. She let it go. There's movement on the Arizona border, he said. Southern Cochise County. Weapons running through an old network. Tunnels, drop points, relay stations. It's sophisticated, not cartel sophisticated. Different how, special forces different. Late 80s, early 90s doctrine. The way they pick and hold relay points. Decision pattern. It reads like someone trained at Bragg before half the men on this base were born. She said nothing. We need someone who can get close. To the network, or to whoever runs it. And your grandfather is the one man alive who might recognize the hand behind it. He won't talk to strangers. No, won't talk to Dia. No. She looked at him, but he might talk to me. He didn't answer. He didn't have to, she laughed. Not warmly. So I'm not here because of what you saw on the range yesterday. You were on our list before yesterday, he said. Yesterday just confirmed it, that I'm useful, flat. No heat. Just naming the shape of it. Yes, and she respected the directness. That surprised her. She hadn't planned to respect anything about this man, and now she'd have to revise that, which was annoying. She thought about the letter in her pocket, the small, stiff square of it against her chest. Don't trust him. He knows why I died. Her father had meant Voss, but the warning had a way of widening once it was in your head. Once it was there, you started measuring everyone against it. "Show me what you have," she said. He opened the folder he'd been holding. The top document was old, partly declassified, black bars across certain lines like Thin from a smile. The heading, Operation Sandfall, 14 September 1994. Arizona-Mexico border zone. Classification. She read fast. She'd learned to read fast and keep all of it. Another thing from Henry 6, one mission. An interdiction op targeting a weapons pipeline. 5 killed in what the report called an engaged firefight with hostile forces. One survivor, Henry Callahan, Henry Donovan. Same man. A different name on the paperwork, the way these things went in that decade, and the officer in command of the operation are Voss. She kept her face still. Perfectly still, because she was good at that, because Henry had taught her that too. Never show them what you're holding until you're ready to use it. She turned the page, a surveillance photograph. Blurred by distance, caught on thermal, a single figure crossing scrubland at night. Timestamp in the corner, 6 weeks ago. That's your network. She said, "That's someone running it." She looked at the image a long moment, then she did what she always did. She stopped looking at the center and looked at the edges, at the corner of the page. Someone had written something small in blue ink and then tried to scratch it out, gently. The way you try to take something back without admitting you ever wrote it. But the page had been photocopied before the scratching. And the copy kept everything. Thomas knew. 2 words, her father's name, who had survived a desert in 1994, who had left a letter in 2004 saying, "He knows why I died," who had seen something, known something, and carried it into Iraq the following April and never carried it back out. She set the document down, carefully. With exactly the care she'd used to set down the rifle the day before, because that was the only steady thing she had to hold on to right now, and she was holding it with both hands. "I'll do it," she said. Warden nodded, "but I see Henry first." She looked at him level, before any briefing, before any prep, any plan, any operational anything. "I talked to my grandfather first, of course, alone." "Understood." She nodded once. "Turn back to the inventory. Come back at 1800 with everything you have." She said, "All of it. Not the version where the interesting parts are blacked out. I've seen enough of those for one morning." He stood, moved to the door. "Stopped that shot yesterday," he said, 1100. 18-mile crosswind. Shouldn't have been notable," she said, not turning around. "My grandfather had me making that distance at 14. She heard the door close behind him, and she stood alone in the cold and the flicker, with her father's name scratched into the corner of a document that was never meant to exist, and let herself feel, for exactly one breath, no more, the full weight of what she'd just agreed to carry. Then she picked up the clipboard and went back to work, because that was the other thing Henry taught her. When the world tilts under you, you do the next small ordinary thing. You count the rounds, you sign the sheet, you keep your hands moving and your hands steady, and the rest of you catches up. She walked out to the edge of the base that evening. She did that sometimes, when she needed to think, and the 4 walls of the cage felt too much like the inside of her own skull. There was a fence line on the north end, where the developed ground gave way to open country, and beyond it the land rolled away toward a horizon already going the deep blue-violet of a Montana winter dusk. The mountains stood black against it. 40 miles north, somewhere past that darkening edge, was a cabin with a single light in the window and an old man inside it who had been waiting 20 years for a day he could not schedule. She leaned on the fence and looked north and let herself, finally, think the thoughts she'd been holding off all day. 3 years. 3 years she'd been 20 feet from Randall Voss. 3 years she'd handed him reports and stepped aside in corridors and watched him walk through her building like she was furniture. And the whole time, the answer to her father's death had been standing in front of her wearing a colonel's eagle, smiling, never once looking down far enough to see her. She thought she'd feel rage. She didn't. Not yet. What she felt was stranger and colder and more useful than rage. She felt patient. She felt the way Henry must have felt all those years in that cabin, with the map on the wall and the box under the bed, and the long, long discipline of a man who understood that the right moment does not arrive when you're angry. It arrives when you're ready. And being ready is quiet work. It is the quietest work there is. Expect what from an ammo girl. She almost laughed, because that was the gift, wasn't it? The accidental gift Voss had handed her on the range without ever knowing he'd handed her anything. He had looked at her and decided completely that there was nothing there to see. And a man who has decided there is nothing to see will never, ever check again. He didn't see her. Good, she thought. Let him keep not seeing me. For a little while longer, The wind came down off the mountains and went straight through the fence and through her jacket, and she didn't move out of it. She let it come. She'd never minded the cold the way other people did. Henry used to say the cold was honest. It told you exactly what it was and never pretended to be anything else. People could learn a thing or two from weather, he said. Most of them never did. She took the letter out of her breast pocket, unfolded it in the last of the light. She didn't need to read it again. She had every word, but she wanted to see her father's handwriting, the slant, the flag-planting R, the hand of a man she could barely remember, who had sent her birthday cards until she was 7, who had her mother's good cheekbones and Henry's stillness, and who had stood above a drainage ditch in the Arizona dark in September of 1994 and made the choice to stay above it so another man could live. The bravest man Henry would ever describe, and he'd left her one page, one name, and a difference she was supposed to hold on to no matter who told her otherwise. Why I'm going to be killed, not why I died. She folded it back up, slid it into the pocket over her heart. Tomorrow she would drive north, 40 miles, to a porch where a 72-year-old man was almost certainly already sitting, already listening for the particular sound of her truck a mile out, already deciding to go back inside so she wouldn't see him waiting. She would put this letter on the armrest between them, and she would say the words her father told her to say when she was ready. She was ready. The last light went out of the sky over the mountains. The first hard stars came up in the east, where the dark always arrived first. Somewhere behind her, the bass settled into its evening rhythm. Engines, voices, the ordinary machinery of a place that had no idea what had quietly woken up inside it that morning. Ray Donovan stood at the fence a moment longer. Then she pushed off it and turned back toward the lights. She walked the way she always walked, quiet, unhurried. A small woman in a work jacket that nobody on this base would think to look at twice. For the first time in 3 years, maybe longer than that, the name she carried felt like her own, not the ammo girl. Ray Donovan, daughter of Thomas, granddaughter of Henry Ironside Donovan, who paid attention, who held the line, and who did not miss. She almost smiled. Almost then she went inside to pack a bag for Montana. The drive north took longer than 40 minutes. It always did in November, when the ice came down out of the high passes and laid itself across Route 93 in long invisible sheets. The sky pressed low and gray over the pine ridgeline like something deciding whether to snow. Ray didn't mind. She needed the road. She needed the long empty stretches and the frozen fence posts and the occasional hawk sitting motionless on a wire, watching the ditch with the patience of a thing that had learned patience the hard way. She needed to think, except thinking kept circling back to the same 3 places. Her father's letter, riding in the pocket over her heart, Randall Voss's face going blank on that range, and 2 words scratched into the corner of a document that was never supposed to exist. Thomas knew, so she stopped trying to think and just drove, which was its own kind of thinking if you were a Donovan. Henry used to say a man does his best reasoning with his hands busy and his eyes on the road. She'd argued with him about it once, when she was 16 and sure she knew better. She didn't argue with him about it anymore. He was on the porch when she pulled in. Of course he was. He always knew when she was coming, and she'd long ago stopped asking how. He'd told her once it was the engine. Her truck had a particular note in it, a faint catch in the second cylinder he kept offering to fix, and she kept declining. That was probably true. But it always felt like more than that with Henry. Felt like he heard things other people couldn't, and had decided, a long time ago, that the polite thing was to pretend he didn't. He looked smaller than the last time. That was the first thing she saw, and it landed harder than she expected. Not frail. Henry Donovan would not be frail if you paid him to be, but smaller in the way men get when pain has been living inside them a while. It takes something. Borrows a little of the upright. His left knee was wrapped under his trousers and a cane leaned against the porch rail, and he stood with his weight shifted off it in a way he would have called nothing, and she knew was not nothing. He watched her climb the steps. Didn't say anything. She sat in the other chair for a minute, maybe 2. They just looked out at the mountains together, the way they always had, the way that with Henry was a whole conversation conducted entirely in silence. Then she reached into her jacket, laid her father's letter on the armrest between them. He looked at it a long time before he touched it. "How long have you had this?" he said. Not really a question. More like a man checking a figure against one he already carried. 3 days, you read it. Yes. Pause. A raven crossed the pale sky above the tree line, far off, just a moving shape against the gray. He wrote it a month before he deployed, Henry said. Gave it to me. Told me to decide when you were ready to have it. He paused. I've been deciding for 20 years. She didn't say anything. That was the right call. Because he wasn't finished, and she could feel that he wasn't, the way you can feel the weight still hanging in a room. A man came to see you, he said. Felix Warden, not a question either, you know him. I know who he is. A small distinction. Henry always made small distinctions, and they always meant something. What did he show you? Operation Sandfall. Henry's jaw moved. Just slightly. And a document, she went on. A margin note someone tried to scratch out. Thomas knew. She kept her voice level. It cost her a little. Not much, but a little. I need you to tell me what he knew, Henry. I think it's time you told me everything. The raven was gone. The sky was just sky. He picked up the letter. Turned it over in his hands the way you turn something you've held so many times it's become part of the map of your own palm. Then he set it back down, gently, and looked out at the black line of the mountains. Thomas didn't just know, he said. Thomas saw. He talked for the better part of an hour, and she listened the way he'd taught her to listen, without interrupting, without showing him her face doing anything, because the kindest thing you can offer a man finally setting down a thing he's carried for 30 years is to be still enough that he can do it. September 1994, 6 men. Southern Arizona. 2 miles off the Mexican line. An interdiction op against a pipeline that had been running for years. Weapons moving south. Money moving north. And somewhere in the dark middle of it, a network of people who somehow knew, always, exactly when and where American operators would walk into the scrub. Because someone told them they were waiting, Henry said. And the word sat in the room like a stone dropped in still water. You don't get that kind of positioning off surveillance. The timing was perfect, too perfect. Somebody handed them the plan. 5 men died in 11 minutes. Henry survived because Thomas put him down into a drainage ditch and stayed above it, firing, drawing fire, buying the seconds Henry needed to reach hard cover. And then Thomas survived too, somehow against the arithmetic of it, 2 grazes and a blown eardrum. Because the firing stopped before it should have. Because whoever called that ambush and decided that 2 bleeding, deafened men, 2 miles from anywhere, were not worth finishing. That was a mistake. I knew it was an inside job before I was back across the border, Henry said. But Thomas knew that night. He'd seen something earlier in the evening, a communication. He didn't tell me what, said he needed to be sure first. Said he wouldn't accuse a man without being certain. Henry's hands folded together on the table. That was the one mistake he ever made. Needing to be certain. By the time he was certain, the man had a head start that lasted 30 years. She kept her hands flat on her knees. Voss was the operational commander, she said. He looked at her sideways. You already knew, she said. Not an accusation, just naming it. I've known for 30 years. Then why? Because knowing isn't proving. Said it quietly, and he said it like forged iron. I know. You know, Warden suspects. But Voss spent 3 decades making sure that what we know and what can be demonstrated in a room with lawyers in it are 2 completely different things. A pause. Thomas spent 7 years trying to build the bridge between them, and in April of 2004, he deployed to Iraq under a mission roster that Voss had approval authority over. She breathed, just breathed. Because anything else right now and she'd be no use to anyone, and being of use was the only thing she had to hold, he stood, slow, with the cane. Went into the back room without asking her to follow. She followed. The cabin was exactly what 30 years of a disciplined man alone with his memories would produce. Clean, spare, every object where it belonged, and over the kitchen table pinned to the wall a map of the American Southwest, not decoration, working. Annotated in a hand she recognized as operational notation, marks and lines and dates connecting things the official record swore had nothing to do with each other. He'd been running this from a cabin in Montana. For 30 years, the patience of it hit her somewhere under the breastbone and stayed there. He came back carrying a metal box, the fireproof kind with the combination lock. He set it on the table and opened it, and she looked down into 30 years, folders, photographs, a handwritten ledger with dates running back to 1995, 2 USB drives, small digital recorder, bank records, correspondence, 2 signed testimonies from men who, he told her, hadn't lived to see this day, but had been smart enough to put things in writing before they went. Every piece I could collect, he said, without tipping him off that I was collecting it. Men like Voss underestimate men like me, eventually. We stopped being a threat worth watching. He lowered himself back into the chair. He stopped watching me years ago. That's the only reason this box exists. She thought about the cage. About 3 years of being looked through. About a colonel who had decided there was nothing there to see. I understand that, she said. He looked at her a moment, and something shifted in his face. something that, in a different man, might have been the beginning of a smile. I know you do, he said. She nodded at the box. What's missing? He picked up the recorder. Held it up. This is good. It's him in 2019, not knowing I was there. 5-year-old audio file from an unverified source. His lawyers will argue context all day. He set it down. What they can't argue is a chain, the full thing. From the 1994 ambush to whatever's running in Cochise County right now, because it never stopped, Ray. Changed hands and kept moving, he looked at her. We need someone to walk that chain. Document it clean. Find what Thomas found. Warden wants me to bring it to Dia. Warden's compromised. He doesn't know how badly, but he is. Henry's voice didn't rise. It never rose. You don't bring this to the institution that protected Voss for 30 years. You bring it to someone outside that institution's reach. I have a name. A senator, Armed Services Committee. Harlan Bryce. He was a ranger, 88 to 96. He knew your father. He was at the memorial. A pause. Warden doesn't know about the box. Or the senator. And it stays that way until the moment it can't be stopped. She sat with it, which took about 4 seconds. Your way, she said. Your contact. He nodded. She stood and looked at the map, at 30 years of careful, invisible, patient work, at the lines connecting things no one was ever supposed to connect. He was brave, she said, not looking at Henry, wasn't he? A long silence behind her. The bravest man I ever knew, Henry said, and I knew a great many brave men. She took her hand off the map. I'm going to need biscuit, she said. He almost smiled again. Almost, I figured. Clifton, Biscuit, Tatum picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake, which meant he'd been expecting her, which meant that somehow, and she had given up trying to explain the how of Clifton Tatum, he already knew something was in motion before she said a word. Ray, I need you. A pause. 3 seconds, Arizona. How did you? Heard some things. He cleared his throat. When do we leave? 2 days. I'll have to ask my neighbor to look in on the place. She almost said you don't have a neighbor for 9 miles. 0500, she said instead. I'll pick you up. I'll be ready at 0430. You're always late. I am never late. You're always late, and one day I'll prove it to you. He hung up first. He always hung up first. It was, she'd decided years ago, one of the 17 things she genuinely loved about the man. He knew exactly when a conversation was complete, and he did not waste a single word past that point. Lieutenant Dana Reeves arrived at Fort Kellerman the next morning, 6 hours before they were due to fly south. She was precisely what you'd expect from a DIA field intelligence officer. 32. Dark hair cut short and practical. The posture of someone who'd gone to the right schools, graduated near the top, and had no intention of letting you forget either fact. She carried a tablet and a briefing folder and the faint expression of a person who had been handed an assignment she considered slightly beneath her. She looked at Ray for about a second and a half. Ray looked back for 3. Lieutenant Reeves, Warden said. Field intelligence and signal support. And my handler, Ray said. Reeves didn't blink. I'd prefer. Handler. Ray turned back to the map Warden had spread across the table. It's fine. I've worked with worse, have you though? Said the voice in her head. You've literally never had a handler before. You don't actually know what worse looks like. Not now, she told it. The briefing ran 90 minutes. Southern Cochise County. 3 known relay points strung along an old corridor of dry creek beds and smuggling tunnels that predated half the people in the room. Surveillance imagery. Radio intercepts that Reeves had organized into a timeline with a clinical precision that was, Ray admitted privately and to absolutely no one, genuinely good. The tactical signature was unmistakable once you knew the language. The way relay points were chosen, not for proximity but for field of view. The communication windows. The discipline of it, classic Special Forces doctrine, late 80s into the early 90s. Bragg methodology worn smooth by repetition into something closer to instinct than training. Some had learned this where Voss learned it, or had been taught by someone who had any ID on the network coordinator, Ray asked. Not yet, Reeves said. I'm asking Warden. Reeves's jaw tightened, a fraction of a millimeter. Ray logged it, a designation, Warden said, no confirmed identity. The network refers to its coordinator as the architect. Architect, Biscuit repeated from the corner, where he'd sat through the entire briefing with his coffee and his magnificent stillness. Somebody's proud of himself. Signature's been consistent across 18 months of observation, Reeves said. Structural logic the whole time. No variation, no adaptation. Which means either he's not worried about being found, Ray said, or he's been doing it long enough that the patterns become instinct. Reeves finished a beat. They looked at each other across the table. All right, Rath thought, with some reluctance. She's not slow, don't tell her that. said the voice. I wasn't going to. Flew into Tucson on a Tuesday evening, and the desert hit Ray the moment she stepped off the plane. 58 degrees. Dry air that smelled of creosote and dust and something faintly mineral. After weeks of Montana cold, it felt like stepping into someone else's climate. Like the earth had quietly changed the rules without telling her. Cochise County was another hour southeast. They drove in two vehicles, Ray and Biscuit in the lead truck, Reeves trailing in a nondescript sedan that was trying very hard to look like a rental and succeeding completely. What do you make of her? Biscuit said, somewhere past the second exit. Saguaro standing like dark sentinels in the wash of the headlights. Handler, obviously the handler. Ray watched the highway unspool. She's competent. High praise coming from you. I didn't say I trust her, Biscuit nodded. Sipped his gas station coffee. Said nothing more, which was the other thing about Clifton Tatum. He knew when a sentence was finished and a silence should be allowed to do its work. The first relay point was a ranch 2 miles off the line. Abandoned since 2009, on paper. On paper being a phrase that meant approximately nothing in Cochise County if you knew where to put your eyes. They went in at 02:30 on foot from the staging point. Reeves had a drone pass from 4 hours earlier, clear of personnel, 2 small heat signatures near the structure consistent with coyotes or javelina. The night was cold for Arizona, low 40s, a half moon throwing just enough light to make the shadows interesting and the footing honest. Ray moved ahead, Biscuit behind her with the quiet of a man who'd learned silence in loud places, Reeves bringing up the rear and moving better than a signals officer strictly needed to. Another note, filed: the ranch house was gutted, but not recently, cleared out systematically over years. What remained was infrastructure. Marks on the concrete where heavy equipment had stood. A modified electrical panel wired for things no ranch ever needed. Communication conduit running through the east wall toward the border corridor. Reeves swept it with her scanner, picking up residual signal, photographing in fast practiced bursts. Biscuit moved through to the back room, and Ray crossed to what had been the kitchen because something was pulling her eye to the floor, the corner, where the baseboard met the wall, where the paint was a half shade off and the wood had been lifted and replaced by someone fatching it almost, but not quite, exactly. She worked the small pry bar from her jacket. Lifted the section the hollow underneath held 3 things. A document in a waterproof sleeve, a burner phone, screen cracked, and a ring. She reached for the ring first, because some frequency she didn't have a name for had gone perfectly still the instant her flashlight found the metal. She turned it. Read the inside of the band, Thomas and Eleanor, 1997, her parents' wedding year, her mother's name, her father's ring, which meant Thomas had stood in this exact room, not in 1994. The ring was dated 1997. He'd come back 3 years after the ambush, after the official record closed the file and moved on. He'd come back and he'd kept looking. And he'd left this here, not lost it. Left it because Thomas Donovan didn't lose things. Henry had been very clear about that. He left it as a marker, a proof point. The hallmark date inside the band would tell the right person exactly when he'd been here. He left it for someone who would come looking, who would know to lift the floorboard, who would understand what they were holding the second they read the inscription. Her throat closed. She opened her breathing the way she opened it before a shot. Deliberate, slow, a door swinging wide on purpose. He knew you'd come, said the voice. No humor in it now. He didn't know me, she answered. I was 3. He knew who you'd grow into. Because he knew Henry. And Henry made you. She closed her fingers around the ring. Biscuit, she said quietly. He filled the doorway, looked at her hand, at what was in it. His face did something fast and complicated, and then went very still. That's, she said. A pause. Okay, he said, just the one word, carrying about 40 years of weight. She slid the ring into the pocket over her heart, alongside the letter. Both of them now, both belonging to her father. Both left for her to find across 20 years and 2,000 miles. She lifted the document sleeve, opened it. 8 pages, handwritten, her father's hand but denser than the letter, harder, packed tight with dates and coordinates and names and transactions. 7 years of evidence compressed into 8 pages meant to be found by exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. She read the last line. If you found this, you went looking, which means you already know enough to finish it. Trust Henry. Trust whoever Henry trusts. Don't trust the institution. Trust the people. She looked up at the gutted room, the modified panel, the marks on the floor, and from the front of the house, Reeves said, "We have a problem, not a small one. 4 vehicles coming up the dirt road from the south, fast, no headlights. Nobody runs a desert road blacked out at 3 in the morning for an innocent reason. Go, Ray said. They went. Out the east window, into the scrub, fast but controlled. The kind of movement that looks like it should be loud and isn't, when your body knows the difference between panic fast and tactical fast. Biscuit first, Ray second, Reeves third. The vehicles hit the perimeter as they cleared the structure. Voices. Not Spanish English. American accents. It landed in her chest as like a stone in still water rippling outward. American, not cartel. American. They went prone behind a dry creek bank 50 meters out as the shooting started. Not at them, not yet. The building. Someone sweeping it. Thorough. Professional. She looked at Biscuit. He was already looking at her. Then a figure came around the east side, and the moonlight caught the way he moved, the way he held his weapon. Signal he passed to the man behind him. A tap, a hand sign she knew from a training manual she'd read in Henry's cabin at 16, because Henry kept every manual from every era, and she had read all of them. 75th Ranger Regiment. Late 90s doctrine, not cartel. American trained. Former, almost certainly, given the circumstances, but trained recently enough that it was still in the muscle. 6 tangos. Reeves breathed beside her, tablet face down, weapon drawn. And here was the thing about Dana Reeves that Ray had not anticipated. She was scared, visibly, the way any sane person would be. But she was not frozen. Her hands were steady. Her voice was controlled. Scared but functional, Ray thought. That's better than not scared. Not scared people get you killed. 3 on the east, 3 sweeping west, Ray murmured. They'll do a perimeter check. They'll find our window in 4 minutes. Options, Reeves said. North along the creek bed, 40 meters to the culvert, then east to the road. We can't outrun them in open ground. We move parallel and stay low. They moved. It was 12 minutes of the particular fear that doesn't feel like fear while it's happening. It feels like math. Your mind strips out everything that isn't a distance or an angle or a sound, and leaves you the soft crunch of calish under your boots that you have to govern by changing your gait, moving slower than every screaming instinct demands. They were 30 meters from the culvert when Biscuit went down, not dramatically. He just stopped moving right, and she was behind him and caught it instantly. The hitch in his step, the arm coming out wrong. She had his elbow before he finished folding, left arm. He breathed. I'm good. He was not good. He was shot. But he was moving, and moving was the only metric that counted right now. She got under his right side. Reeves appeared on his left without being asked. 3 of them crossed the last 30 meters in a configuration that should not have worked and did, because sometimes bodies know things the mind hasn't caught up to yet. The culvert. Then the road. Then the truck. Nose out, because she'd parked it nose out from habit, Henry's habit, soaked into her over 20 years, and it turned over on the first try, because some things go right occasionally, even on a night like this. She drove. Biscuit in the passenger seat. Reeves in the back with the first aid kit Biscuit had insisted on packing and she'd rolled her eyes at in the motel lot and was now, silently, profoundly grateful for. Through and through, Reeves said, hands working, clean. You're going to be fine. I know I'm going to be fine, Biscuit said. I've been shot before. How many times? This is 4, maybe 5. I stopped counting at 3. A beat. That's not normal, Reeves said, ma'am, said Biscuit. I was in Desert Storm. Normal is a relative concept. Ray drove, and in her head, 6 American operators swept a building in the dark, moving with doctrine she recognized, and somebody had known they'd be there tonight. Agon just like 1994. Someone knew. Someone told. She glanced in the mirror. Reeves, hands on Biscuit's arm. Not on a phone, not on any device, just present, doing the work. I need to know whose side she's actually on, Ray thought. And I need to know tonight, but she didn't say anything. Observe first, always. She drove, and she watched, and she waited. The motel asked no questions and took cash, which suited everyone in the truck. Biscuit went into the first room with his arm properly dressed, his coffee, and his unshakable conviction that he had been through worse, which was, infuriatingly, almost certainly true. Ray and Reeves stood in the narrow corridor between the rooms. 4:47 in the morning, the fluorescent tube overhead buzzing, always the fluorescent lights in every important moment of her life. Was this just her life now? Reeves had her arms crossed. The left sleeve of her jacket was dark where Biscuit's blood had transferred. Someone knew we were there, Ray said. Yes, the briefing had 5 people in it. Warden, you, me. Biscuit, the analyst who built the relay dossier. Reeves said nothing. How long? Ray said. Not loud. Just clean and plain and unhurried. How long have you been reporting our position to Voss? A long silence. Then Reeves uncrossed her arms and let them fall, and her face did something more complicated than guilt. Something that involved knowing you've done a wrong thing and being unable to fully explain, even to yourself, how you arrived at the place where it seemed like the only door available. She reached into her jacket, drew out a second phone. Burner grade, not her issued equipment. She turned it over once in her hand. My brother, she said. Marcus, he's active duty. Voss has approval authority over certain deployment assignments in his command chain. When Warden brought me this, I was told if I didn't cooperate, Marcus would be reassigned forward to a theater that... She stopped. She didn't finish it. She didn't have to. Ray looked at her, not with judgment, with the full attention she gave anything that mattered. How old is he? 24. 24. Walsh's age. The marksman who'd rolled his ankle on the ice and started all of this without ever knowing he'd started anything. Did you call our position in tonight? Ray said specifically. The relay point? No. Reeves met her eyes and didn't flinch off them. I reported a preliminary pass of the county, general air area, not the point. I think Voss already had men in position and was waiting for any sign we were active. I don't think my report is what put 6 men in that building. A pause. But I was going to keep reporting. I want to be honest with you about that. I was going to keep going. The honesty of it sat between them in the buzzing light. Here's what I know, Ray said. When this goes where it's going, and it is going there, Voss loses every authority he holds, every approval, every leverage point, including whatever he's got over your brother. But that only works if everything we bring is clean, unimpeachable, which means you have to be all the way on the record, all of it, including your own part. A long silence. Reeves looked at the phone in her hand. Then she set it on the floor and stepped on it. The crack was very small in the quiet corridor, and very final. Ray looked at the pieces. Then at Reeves. Call Marcus, she said, just to hear his voice. We'll do the rest in the morning. Something moved through Reeves's face, fast, controlled quickly. But Ray caught it, because Ray caught everything. Why do you trust me now? Reeves said. An hour ago I don't trust you yet, Ray said simply. But I trust that you just made a choice. People are mostly the sum of their choices in the end. You just made a better one than the one you walked in here with. She turned toward her door. Get some sleep. We have a long way to go tomorrow. Where are we going? Ray paused with her hand on the door. Montana, she said. Biscuit needs to tell you something. About 1994. And then you're going to understand exactly who we're up against. And why a man like that has been able to do this for 30 years without anyone laying a hand on him. She went in, lay down on the narrow bed in her jacket and her boots, in the dark. The ring and the letter were both over her heart. She pressed her palm flat against them through the fabric. 2 small stiff shapes, both her father's. Both left for her across 20 years and 2,000 miles country he must have known. Somehow, she would one day cross. You went looking, his hand had written. Which means you already know enough to finish it. She thought about finishing it. About what that meant for Voss, and for the institution that had carried him on its shoulders for 3 decades. About what it would be to walk back into Fort Kellerman with the full weight of what she now knew, and stand in front of a man who had spent 30 years certain he was untouchable. Then she thought about Henry, in that cabin. 30 years of patience, stilled into a metal box and a map on a wall, and she thought about something small but exact. Voss on that range 12 days ago, smiling at her like a man who already knew the ending of a story he hadn't bothered to read. Expect what from an ammo girl? She closed her eyes, and she slept, deeply. Without dreaming, the way you sleep when you have finally, completely, stopped wondering what you're fighting for. They drove back to Montana in near silence, which sounds bleak. It wasn't. It was the particular silence of 3 people who have been through something together and don't need to spend words proving it to each other. Biscuit slept most of the way in the back seat, his arm in the sling, his hat tipped over his face, his breathing so even it was almost a kind of prayer. Reeves took the middle hours. Ray drove the first and the last and watched the country change beneath the windshield. Desert scrub giving way to high plains rising into the first suggestion of pine, the whole landscape shifting back toward Montana like a person remembering who they used to be. The ring rode in the pocket over her heart the entire way. She kept her hand off it on purpose, because she knew that the moment she touched it, she'd start thinking things she needed to think later. In the right order. At the right time. Observe first. Always. She was still observing. Henry was awake when they pulled in. It was 4:47 in the afternoon, the winter light already going gold and thin behind the mountains, and the porch was empty, but the front door stood open, which meant he'd heard the truck on Route 93 a mile out. which meant he'd come to the door and then deliberately gone back inside so she wouldn't catch him waiting. Henry Donovan did not wait where other people could see him do it. 30 years of that. 30 years of refusing to be seen wanting something. She went in first. Biscuit and Reeves stayed by the vehicles, the right call, which Biscuit had understood without a word, which was exactly why she'd brought Biscuit. Henry sat at the kitchen table, the metal box open in front of him, his hands flat on either side of it, like a man steadying something that might otherwise drift. He looked up when she came in, and his eyes went, not to her face, to the pocket over her heart, to the small stiff shape there that he had last seen on his son-in-law's hand. He drew a breath. "Just one. You found it," he said. "He left it for me. He left it for whoever went looking." He paused. "I always thought that would be me. Every spring for 20 years I told myself this is the year I drive back down to Arizona and I go looking." His mouth moved. "My knee had other plans." She sat across from him, took the ring from her pocket and set it on the table between them, beside the 8-page document she laid down next to it. He looked at the ring a long time. He didn't touch it, then he did. Picked it up with 2 fingers, turned it once, read the inside of the band he already knew by heart, set it back down, gently the way you set down something made of something more fragile than metal. "He was going to give you that," he said, "when you were old enough. He told me before he shipped out. Made me promise I'd hold it." His voice did something on the last word. He brought it back under control, but she'd heard it. "I held it 20 years. She let the silence sit, because some things are too large for an answer. Then she told him about the desert, about the 6 men moving in 75th Ranger doctrine across the scrub, about the English in the dark and the American accents, and the bullet that had gone through Biscuit's arm. She watched his face move through it, through the parts he'd suspected and the one part that landed new, the recruitment. The fact that whoever was running Cochise County wasn't just moving old weapons. He was building something, with men, American men, trained and discarded and angry, brought back out into the dark for a purpose somebody had given them. "That's current," Henry said quietly. "He's still recruiting. He's not running the past. He's building a future out of it." His eyes went to the box, which means he has more to lose now than he did a year ago, which means he'll move the moment he knows we're close. "He already knows," Ray said. "He's known the whole time. I'm sure of it." She didn't have proof of that yet. She'd learned to trust the cold certainty that arrived sometimes, the one that felt like a wind reading rather than a thought. "He's coming, Henry. I can feel it the way you feel weather." Henry looked at her for a long moment, and he didn't tell her she was wrong. Biscuit told the 1994 story at the kitchen table, and that was the right call, for a reason that had nothing to do with logistics, because Biscuit had been there. Not inside it, at Ajit's. Near enough. He'd been running a support element 2 ridges over the night. Sandfall went wrong, and he'd seen something in the gray hour after, and he'd carried his small piece of it for 30 years, with the particular weight of a man who saw a thing he wasn't sure of, made the choice to stay quiet, and spent every year since wondering whether he'd chosen wrong. He sat with his arm in the sling and his coffee in his good hand, and he talked. Henry listened. Reeves listened, and Ray watched Henry's face move through it, until the part where Biscuit described the 2 men leaving the wash in the dawn light. 2 men, not one survivor and one body. 2 men walking out, and the second one carrying a comm set of a kind only a senior officer would have been issued. "I told myself I didn't see what I saw," Biscuit said. "Told myself for 30 years. A man doesn't want to believe that about another man he served the flag beside." He turned his coffee cup a slow quarter turn on the table. "Then this one called me." He nodded at Ray. "And I figured it was finally time to stop telling myself things." Reeves had her tablet open, building. All night she worked, organizing Henry's 30 years and Thomas's 8 pages into a chain of custody that would survive contact with lawyers. Photographs, timestamps, original document preservation logs, handwriting corroboration, provenance of the ring's hallmark date. She worked with the focused, almost grim intensity of a person who has decided, completely, which side of a line she is standing on, and intends to leave no doubt about it in the record. Around 2 in the morning she looked up. "It's not enough to submit it and wait," she said. "Voss is too embedded. Even outside channels, a man with his relationships can slow a paper trail to a crawl, bleak a counter-narrative, get ahead of it." She paused. "We need him to put himself on the record. Live, saying the thing in his own voice in real time, to a channel he can't touch. You can build that," Ray said. "Senator Bryce's office can build that. A secure live feed witnessed at the committee level. The second it's running, anything he says is logged under congressional jurisdiction. No executive agency can pull it. Reeves looked between Ray and Henry. But you'd have to get him here, get him talking, get him to say enough. And here was the thing Ray understood in that moment, the way you understand a shot before you take it. Not as a thought, but as a knowing that arrived complete. He's already coming here, she said. We don't have to get him anywhere. He's bringing himself. Henry set down his coffee. You found a tracker, he said. Not a question. He'd been watching her since she walked in. Not yet. She looked at him. But you think there is one? I think a man who's known the whole time, Henry said slowly. Knew because he's been watching, and a man watches with a device. He looked at Reeves. When you swept the vehicles in Arizona, did you sweep them again after? Reeves was already standing. She found it at 219 on the underside of Ray's wheel well. A magnetic GPS unit, commercial grade, the kind that cost $40 and transmitted to a civilian server. The dust pattern on it was wrong for Arizona. It was Montana dust, which meant it had been placed before they ever left at Fort Kellerman. By someone with access to her truck, she brought it inside in her open palm. Set it on the table beside the ring and the box, 3 objects telling 3 different stories that turned out to be the same story. Battery says 8 to 10 days of transmission, Reeves said. He's had us the whole time, before the briefing. Before any of it, Ray looked at the small black unit. He knew before she did, in a way. He'd been watching her cross the country toward the truth, while she still thought she was moving in secret, so he knows we went to Cochise County. She said, yes, but he doesn't know what we found there. Or what we have. She picked up the tracker, turned it over. Because if he knew that, he'd have moved already. He's coming here thinking he can still contain it. Thinking he's ahead of us. Henry looked at the device in her hand. Leave it on, he said. The room went still. Leave it transmitting, Henry said again, quietly. Let him come. Let him walk up onto this porch, certain he's the one who set the meeting. He looked at Reeves. And you put the feed lib before he gets out of the vehicle. Reeves looked at Ray. Ray looked at the tracker, then at her grandfather, at the man who had spent 30 years learning to wait, and who had just at last found the exact thing he had been waiting for. Your way, she said. Your contact. Your timing, he almost smiled. He's been writing this ending for 30 years. Henry said, I think it's time somebody let him finish it. He just won't like who's holding the pen. It came at 3:47 the next afternoon. She heard the vehicles before she saw them. 2 black SUVs taking the access road too fast, as then slowing as they reached the cabin. Because Voss was a great many things, but stupid had never been one of them. He knew whose ground this was. He knew what that meant. He came out of the first vehicle alone. In uniform, full dress, every button, the entire weight of the institution stitched onto his shoulders, which told her something. A man brings the full uniform when he wants the building behind him to walk up the steps with him, because he doesn't trust himself to be enough on his own. He came to the porch. Ray was already standing there. And here is the thing about seeing him now, in this light. After all of it, he looked exactly the same. That was the wrong feeling part. The same posture from the range 12 days ago, the same level chin, the same certainty radiating off him like heat off a road. He looked at her and she watched his eyes do the thing they had always done. Pass over her, weigh her as a variable, a problem to be managed, and never once land on her as a person. He still didn't see her, even now. Even here, that had always been his mistake. It was going to be his last one. Where's your grandfather, he said. Right here, said Henry. And Henry stepped out. Cane in his right hand, weight honest on his bad knee, but upright. That unbreakable, structural uprightness that 30 years alone in the cold had not bent. A man standing on his own porch, on his own land, for the first time in 3 decades not waiting anymore. Voss looked at him. Something crossed his face. Not quite fear. Something older. The look of a man seeing a ghost he'd assured himself was buried, Henry. Whatever you think you have, this ends here, tonight, the 2 of us, like men. Before it touches anyone who doesn't need touching, it's already submitted, Ray said. He stopped. Just stopped, the way a machine stops when a single gear is seized. Submitted to who? Senate Armed Services Committee. Secure Case Reference, ASCII 2024-111-1847. Logged at 1:13 yesterday afternoon by Senator Harlan Bryce's office. He said it the way she read a serial number in the cage. The way she called a wind correction on a range. Clean. Precise, without heat. And this conversation is being received live by that same office. Right now his eyes went to Reeves, standing in the doorway with her tablet angled, the small green light steady at the top of the screen. And for the first time in the 12 days Ray had been watching his face. For the first time in the 3 years she had walked past him in corridors while he looked through her like glass. She watched Randall Voss understand that he had run out of moves, not because she was stronger, not because her side had more guns. He had 4 armed men in 2 vehicles 30 feet away. She had an old man with a cane, a wounded veteran inside, and a lieutenant holding a tablet. He'd run out of moves because the thing closing around him wasn't force. It was record. You don't understand the world you're trying to pull down, he said, and his voice changed, dropped into something almost gentle, almost fatherly, the register of a man who has talked his way out of every room he was ever cornered in. Your father didn't either at first. That's why he stayed quiet for 7 years, Ray. Because he came to understand that some truths cost more to tell than to carry. He was protecting you. I was protecting. Don't. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The wind off the mountains carried it fine, the same way it had carried, hand me the gun across the range. You don't get to put your name in the same sentence as the word protecting. My father stayed quiet for 7 years to keep me safe from you. And the day he had enough to stop being quiet, he deployed under a roster you signed. You don't protect people, Colonel. Bend them. You've been spending them since 1994, she held his eyes. How many Donovans did you think it would take? For a long moment, nobody on that porch moved. Then something happened in Voss's face that she had not expected and would carry for the rest of her life. Not a snarl, not a threat. The slow, terrible settling of a posture held by force of will for 30 years, finally acknowledging the crack that had been in its foundation the entire time, not the collapse of a muscle. The exhaustion of a man. I didn't know he had a daughter, he said quietly. To her now, not to the feed. When I built the 2004 roster, I knew about Thomas. I didn't know about you. She looked at him, and here was the thing she had not braced for. Not forgiveness. No, not that. Maybe not ever. But something adjacent to understanding. The understanding that the worst things are almost never done by people who believe themselves to be villains. They are done by people who made one decision, and then another that followed from it, and another that followed from that, till 30 years of following had built a man who no longer knew the way back. It didn't make it right. It didn't make her father 1 minute less dead, but it made Voss human. Which was somehow worse, and somehow the only ending that meant anything. That doesn't change what you did, she said. No, he said. It doesn't. He looked at Henry one last time. 2 old men, 30 years, a choice made in a desert under a moon long since set. Henry said nothing, which was the loudest possible answer. Voss turned back toward his vehicle, got in, and the 2 black SUVs went back down the access road. Slow this time, the dust rising and hanging and finally settling in the cold gold light. Reeves lowered the tablet. Bryce's office confirms receipt, she said. Full feed. Timestamped. Everything he said. She looked up. It's done. It started, Henry corrected gently. The rest takes time. Lawyers, hearings, months, maybe years. But it happens, Ray said. It happens, Henry said, because it's on record, and because he just confirmed the shape of the whole thing in his own voice to the United States Senate. Standing on my porch, thinking he was the one who'd come to close it, from inside the cabin, Biscuit's voice. Does this mean somebody's finally going to make me a real cup of coffee? And Ray felt the thing in her chest unclench just slightly, for the first time in 12 days. The reckonings came over the next 2 days, in phone calls and quiet conversations at Henry's kitchen table, while the snow finally arrived and laid itself soft and total across the country outside the windows. Warden first. Reeves took the call on the porch and came back in 4 minutes later, brushing snow from her shoulders. Administrative leave pending the committee inquiry, she said. Access suspended. He's cooperating. His attorney already reached out to Bryce's office. She paused. Apparently he's wanted out of Voss's arrangements for 3 years. He just needed a door to open first. Henry, not looking up from his coffee. Cowardice and complicity look the same from the outside. Only the man himself knows which one he's been living in. Sometimes not even him. Ray thought about that. About the difference between the person who steps on the phone and the person who waits, year after year, for somebody braver to open the door they could have opened themselves. And Marcus, she said to Reeves. Reeves looked at her, and something in her face let go, some tension she'd been carrying since the corridor in Sierra Vista. Since long before that, maybe. Bryce's office flagged his name in Voss's deployment files. He's been pulled back to a stateside posting pending reassignment review. She paused. He doesn't know why yet. I haven't told him. I don't know how to explain any of it. Start with the truth, Ray said. The rest follows from there. It always does. It just takes longer than you want it to. Reeves nodded slowly. Then she didn't think she hadn't done once in 12 days. She smiled, small, tired, real. Thank you, she said, to the room. To no one in particular. To all of it. Nobody said you're welcome. That's not what you say when someone does the right thing after a hard road. You just nod, and you let them keep it. That evening, Biscuit asleep in the spare room and Reeves on the porch on a long, quiet call with a brother who didn't yet understand how close he'd come, Henry slid a second envelope across the table. "You opened Thomas's," he said. "There were 2 in the box. This one's mine." She'd set it aside that first night, 3 weeks and a lifetime ago. Life had intervened. His handwriting. Dense, small, the hand of a man who had written a great deal in cramped spaces over many years. "Ray, I don't know when you'll read this. I don't know how old you'll be, or what will have happened by the time you do. I don't know if I'll still be here to see your face when you reach the end of it. Here's what I do know: you are the best thing I ever made. Not the missions. Not the service. Not one piece of any of that. You came to me at 7 years old with your father's eyes and your mother's stubbornness and no fear of anything in this world, and I thought, this one is going to be trouble. This one is going to be magnificent trouble. I was right on both counts. I taught you to shoot because it was the most useful thing I had to give. But that was never the point, and I think you've always known it wasn't. The point was to teach you that stillness is a skill, that patience is a weapon, that the most powerful thing a person can do in a loud world is learn how to be quiet and wait and not flinch when the moment finally comes. You learned it before I finished teaching it. Finish the thing. Whatever the thing is when you read this, finish it, and then come home and sit on the porch a while and let yourself be still in a way that isn't waiting for anything. You are a Donovan. That has always meant something. It means you pay attention. You hold the line. You protect the people behind you. And you do not miss. Grandpa Henry, she folded it, put it in the pocket over her heart, with the other letter and the ring, both her father's in a sense, both of them there, both against the same heartbeat. Henry was watching the snow come down past the window. "I don't miss," she said. "No." He said, "You never have. You taught me that. You let me." He turned his cup a slow quarter turn on the table, the same gesture Biscuit made. She realized, a whole generation of men who turned their cups when the words got too big. That's the part people always forget. Teaching only works if someone decides to learn. The morning she left was clear and cold and very blue, the snow from the night before lying clean and unbroken across the country in every direction. She packed the truck in 40 minutes. She traveled light. Always had another thing from Henry. You move better when you're not carrying what you don't need. Biscuit was already in the passenger seat with his coffee and his sling and his complete, magnificent refusal to complain about a single thing that had happened in the past 5 days. Reeves stood by her car. This was the part where something was supposed to be said. Something that defined what the two of them were now, after all of it. But that wasn't either of them worked, and Ray understood that now. And so she let the moment be what it actually was. "The inquiry's going to need witnesses," Reeves said. "I know. You'll be deposed. It'll take months. Maybe longer, I know. I'm giving them everything," Reeves said. "Including my own part, the reporting, all of it." She paused. "It's going to complicate my career." "It will, and Marcus's situation won't fully resolve until—" "I know," Ray said. "And you're doing it anyway." I noticed. Reeves looked at her, and something passed between them that neither of them would ever have called friendship out loud, and both of them knew was the beginning of it. "When you're back in D.C., Ray said, "Bryce's office is going to need someone who can explain the signals architecture of the whole submission. Someone who knows the technical chain end to end. I can do that. I know you can." She reached out, not a handshake, something a half step less formal, and put her hand briefly on Reeves's arm above the elbow the way soldiers do. "Do it well." Reeves nodded and got in her car and drove south toward a city and a hearing and a brother she finally got to tell the truth to. Henry walked out to the truck, slow with the cane but upright, always upright. He stood at the driver's window, and she rolled it down, and the cold morning came in over them both. "Drive safe," he said. "I always drive safe. You drove 400 miles to Arizona on 4 hours of sleep and came home with a bullet in your passenger." Biscuit's bullet. "Not mine, Biscuit," from the passenger seat. "Feels like the wrong moment to mention whose plan that was." Henry almost laughed. She did laugh, short, surprised, real, the kind that catches you off guard and reminds you you're still a person and not only a mission. Then they were quiet again, because there was one more thing, and it needed saying before she drove back down into a world that was about to be complicated for a long, long time. "You told me once," she said, "that shooting was the most useful thing you knew. You were wrong." He tilted his head. "Waiting. The most useful thing you taught me was that the most powerful thing a person can do in a loud world is learn how to be quiet." She looked at him. The shooting was just the thing you used to teat. He looked at her for a long moment. Face did the thing it did when he was feeling something large and choosing, as he always chose, to feel it privately. Your father, he said, would have liked you very much. She held that. Let it settle all the way down. I'll call when we reach Kellerman. She said, I'll be here. She put the truck in gear and went down the access road, and at the bottom where it met the county route, she looked in the mirror. Henry was still on the porch. The mountains behind him, the snow, the thin, hard winter blue. He lifted one hand, just the one. She made the turn. Her phone buzzed somewhere north of Missoula. She glanced at it at a stoplight. A number she didn't know, Miss Donovan. Senator Bryce's office. We'd like to schedule a preliminary interview at your earliest convenience. Reference ASCII 2024-11-1847. Please confirm availability. Biscuit, who had been for 40 minutes, said without opening his eyes. Good news or complicated news, both, she said. Probably. Usually the same thing in my experience. He set the phone in the console. She'd answer it later, at the right time, in the right order. Observe first. Always the highway straightened north of Missoula, mountains rising on both sides, the sky going on forever in the way Montana skies did, making everything underneath them feel at once very small and entirely purposeful. She drove with one hand. The other rested flat on her knee, the ring on her index finger catching the low winter light. Not the ring finger, the finger you point with, the one that says that way, over there, this is the direction, the one you hold steady when everything else is moving. He thought about a man who built 8 pages of evidence over 7 years and left them under a floorboard in the desert. For a daughter he'd known only until she was 3 and trusted, across 20 years, to come looking. He thought about an old man who kept a box in a cabin for 30 winters with the patience of someone who understood that the right moment never arrives on your schedule. It arrives when it arrives. Your only job is to be ready when it does. She thought about Voss on the range. That smile. Expect what from an ammo girl? And she thought about the 3 shots, 9 ring, 10 ring, center. About finding the quiet in the middle of all that noise, with 40 people watching and doing the thing anyway. That was the whole of it, she thought. All of it, the whole month. Finding the quiet in the middle of something loud, and not flinching, and doing the thing anyway. The ring caught the light again, and Ray Donovan, daughter of Thomas, granddaughter of Henry Ironside Donovan. 27 years old, driving north through clean Montana snow with a wounded friend asleep beside her, and 3 generations of her family's courage in the pocket over her heart, and a senator's office in her phone, and a future that was going to be very, very complicated. Ray Donovan kept her hands steady and drove toward it, without flinching, which was, she had finally come to understand, the only way to drive toward anything that was ever worth reaching.